welcome back to another episode of Balancing Business and Baby. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Rachel onto the podcast today. Rachel is not your average fertility coach. Rachel is a beacon of hope, basically, for women that are kind of navigating the challenging journey of infertility, something that I struggled with myself, which I've talked about on other podcasts as well. So I'm hoping to go into that in a little bit more detail with Rachel. But she helps women reclaim control of their family building story and overcome infertility burnout, which I know is a big thing. It's certainly one for me anyway. And I'm a big believer. I actually said this on an episode that I did with someone else on Young Dad Pod. I think that there's a lot of times where you kind of get in this mindset, and I think a lot of the fertility problem is to do with mindset, and that kind of we focus too much on the fact that we're not getting pregnant and our bodies kind of react to that, even though we think we're kind of, healthy and we're doing all of these other things, that we forget how much power the brain has and how much our kind of thought can impact things, which is why a lot of the times you see these stories of people that have had they've adopted or they've gone down the surrogacy route, and then they found that they've got pregnant kind of naturally, because I think they've kind of let go of that kind of that burnout that they had and that feeling of that kind of overwhelm of, I'm not going to get pregnant, this isn't going to happen for me, and then all of a sudden it does, because they've actually got what they wanted. So I'm rambling, but yeah, so she's also a podcast host as well. She runs the It How You Carry It podcast. So welcome, Rachel. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Lovely to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and just, have a good conversation with you and share, a little bit about me and then my story. And hopefully that spreads more hope and just courageousness from other women that are probably going through the same thing.
Definitely. I think it's one of those things that fertility is kind of, I feel like it's talked about, but then at the same time it's not talked about enough. It's a funny thing. It's one of those things that you don't really know how to sort of ask someone, about their problems that they're having or their struggles that they're having. You do see it in the media a lot as well. They do Infertility Week, once a month, and they sort of share, spread light on it. But again, you wouldn't sort of walk up to someone and have a conversation with them about it. It's still kind of a very personal thing. And I think that we sort of struggle with that as women, especially, and I know men, obviously struggle with fertility as well, but I think the burden is a little bit more on the women. I know for me, when I was going through fertility problems, I felt like a failure as a woman in a way.
Right.
The one thing that I was supposed to be able to do as a woman, is kind of be able to have a period and then have a baby. And I felt like my body had just kind of gone, nope, that's it. No, not happening.
Thing is that I think I talk about with a lot of people that struggle with it too, is that you're like, we grew up just knowing not to get pregnant, like that's all you learn about. It's like, make sure you don't get pregnant, make sure you don't get, and you learn sex ed at a very basic, I don't even know, I can't even remember what we learned, but I definitely did not learn about women's reproductive health and knowing more about what does it mean when I have a painful period? What does it mean when all these things are happening? I think that certainly could have helped, at least planted seeds or kind of understood your body more, so that you weren't just like, well, it was supposed to work. Like, why isn't it working now? You do all the things right. I think we do all the things right, from going to school and then finding a partner and then getting the it job. And then, and then you're like, okay, now we got married and now it's time to have kids. So it's going to happen, right? We're all surprised and blindsided. Well, we, as in the 1 in 6 or 1 in 4 that don't get that, it's just, it doesn't come that easy sometimes. And it's unfortunate that as much as like you said, as much as we talk about it, it's hard to talk about it in real life and to find people that truly are going to talk about it with you. It's how do you approach it? Like, hi, I'm going through infertility. Are you?
Exactly.
It's not an easy conversation. And some people don't like to share anymore because they don't want the questions. They don't want the advice. All of that stuff becomes a lot. So I think you just, even though you naturally are an open person, I think I was a very open person about it. But there was this point in my journey where then I pulled back and I was like, you know what? I'm just tired of people making me feel worse than I already do. Like I I already feel bad enough. And, we're obviously struggling in the background with IVF and all of that. And then having people just be like, well, you could just go on vacation and just relax and it'll happen. And you're like, that's not how it works. If it was that easy,
Yeah,
So
100%. You get unsolicited advice, don't you, rather than sort of useful advice like, did you try losing weight? Or, have you eaten a banana?
yeah,
Did you
diet
try
part
this
2 killed
position?
me. I was like, guys, like it's not
Yeah,
just your diet. I understand it's part of it, right? And that's it is part of the equation, but it's not the sole equation where it's like, well, just change your food and you'll be fine. It's not.
yeah,
It's not that
yeah,
easy. Yeah.
definitely. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your journey and how you got into coaching? And obviously you've got the business, the fertility coaching, but how did
Mhm.
you kind of progress into the fertility coaching? If you don't mind sharing a little bit about your story.
Of course, I'd love to. Thank you for asking. Well, I am a mom of 4 kids. So I do have 4 kids, even though I did myself experience infertility. And I guess I still am considered, going through it, not like actively, but like I never achieved a pregnancy myself. So being in that sense that like I still technically infertile, such a weird thing to say, but because of my background and how I grew my family, I chose to grow my family through international adoption. We adopted from South Korea, and then we did surrogacy for our very last embryo. And because of that experience, I wanted to share my story more, so I started my podcast. And then I started coaching women who are also going through tough journeys. Maybe they're in their 5-10 year mark of like still trying to do other things. And maybe the conversations of doing egg donation or sperm donation, or, some sort of conversation about it, surrogacy or whatever, but not being able to get over that mental hurdle of like, oh, I can do this, because based off of DNA. And that's a common thing that I like to talk about, is that motherhood goes beyond genetics. It's the relationship, it's the bond that you create, it's the environment, it's your home, the family that you're building, the foundation you're building with the person that you chose to do life with. You're the people that are creating this home environment. You create your traditions, you create all the routines and all the special little things that you will do within your family. That's what motherhood and parenthood is. And I wanted to be able to share that with my story, because I know that it's a scary thing. Not everyone talks about adoption, and not everyone's talking about surrogacy. I know surrogacy, I think I've seen it a lot more, but it's still I think it's one of the things where it's like, I hope it's not me. Like I think a lot of women, like they see it and they're like, oh, cool, we're talking about it. But they're in the back of your mind, I think it's hard to admit, like, I don't want to be that person, right? Like you want to be able to have your chance to experience pregnancy and have the successful quote unquote stuff. I'm doing this. The quote unquote, I forget, I'm not sure, but the quote unquote like successful IVF story, right? Like, or the rainbow baby. And I guess that the rainbow baby term can also be loosely used too, right? Like I would still consider like having my babies as having the rainbow babies, because they still came after, a lot of trial and error. I guess that's not a great way to put it, but yeah. So, but I think just overall, the overarching theme with like how I went into adoption, because I started with IVF first, but they told me my ovaries were older than my age. I was like mid-20s then, and they were just like, your ovaries and egg quality is like in your 40s. And I was like, wonderful. And so I got second opinions and I started just kind of going down that line. But because it was, for when I was in my mid-20s, like I knew no one that was going through for infertility. And so I was like, I just can't do this anymore. They wanted me to change my lifestyle. They wanted me like, and fair enough. Like if you're in that headspace and you're going to do it. But I think I was already trying. My husband and I, we also had male factor infertility. And so we had low numbers all around on his end. And we were just young kids and we were just like, oh, this is too stressful. And money wise, financially, we took a lot of breaks. And I try to share this with clients as well, is that choose to maybe stop or take a break from IVF. You can table it for now, in that sense, where it's like, okay, for right now, I'm just going to table it. It doesn't mean I'm giving up. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop this forever. It's not like a final decision. And I think that's what allowed me then to be like, okay, I can take care of myself. We kind of got back into our work and then just our relationship and family. And then the idea came up and I was like, why don't we adopt? Always wanted to adopt. It's funny though that I never even shared it with my husband though. So I took it there and he was like, yeah. And he was like fully on board. And I was like, you are? You're really like okay with this? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. And you see our faces light up and we're just like researching all the different types of adoption routes that we could take. And so we ultimately picked international adoption. If anyone also is listening and you're yourself, like when you're going through infertility, you're like, whatever is the quickest way to get to speed this up now. Like I want to make up for all the lost time. And so international adoption seemed to have a more predictable timeline. And we were like, oh well, and we also get to travel. let's just like put everything all together, like right before we become parents, let's just travel. And so it was like a lot of good pluses that were happening, and it was a really well-known. And another thing that I do tell clients a lot too is that talk to people that use the program. Like find families that will ultimately look like the way your family is going to be built. And that just gives you so much more strength and courage to like keep going. And so when I was looking into the agency we used, I spoke to like maybe 3 other moms. And that was when I was like, I'm sold. We're doing this. Like, I'm in, and it's an amazing experience. And when my son came home, we then attempted IVF again, and that didn't go very well, but we got 2 healthy embryos, and we ended up losing 1 embryo, transferring that baby girl to me. And then, so that was a huge, that was a big moment for me. And I was devastated, obviously. And that's when we were like, okay, pause again. And so we tabled it again, and we're like, we'll freeze the embryo that's there that we have, and then we'll adopt again. I'll preface, we did really want a big family, and we ultimately were shooting for 3. That was our negotiated amount of kids. So after my daughter came home she's also from South Korea. So when we went ahead and we're thinking about our 3rd kid, and we were like, okay, what do we do with our very last embryo? We did have the conversation of like adopting again, but then we were like, well, if we do that and then the embryo does stick, we'll have 4. So that's kind of not the negotiated number of kids that we had planned on. So we ultimately said, let's work on the embryo. And so when we got surprised by the option that was presented to us by my fertility doctor was, why don't we do surrogacy? And I was like, wait, what? I thought we were going to transfer the embryo to me. And so that was like a huge wave of emotions that I had to go through of just trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean? Why? And I realized that with my fertility doctor, Dr. Amy, she's known as the egg whisperer. She provides like the most exceptional care possible that I think in that time, like I didn't think I needed it, right? Like I think she brought the compassionate side and the empathetic side that most doctors, in fertility clinics probably wouldn't. She really handheld me and talked to me a lot. And her response rate on email and everything and calls was like, you felt like you were getting one-on-one attention all the time. And it never felt like she was just doing some, regular protocol. It was always very tailored to us. Anyway, so in that conversation, she's like, okay, well, look, like let's go through what it would look like based on the numbers, the stuff, the data that we have on how your body is doing and all that. And mind you, I think this is the start of COVID, I think, when this was all happening. So I don't even think we went in and like we were just doing this all over the phone. And I don't know what lengths you went to. I'm sure everyone's very different in their fertility journey. But like she was like, you would have to come into the clinic and do this, like I think it's called intralipid. And you would have to sit there for like hours doing that every day up until we transfer. And then again after. And so, and I was like, well, how many hours would I have to be there? And she was like, maybe 1 to 2. Some people take 4 hours. I was like, 4 hours? Like, that's a full-time job just sitting there, getting this thing. And she was like, well, everybody's body is different and receives it differently. So they might have to do it slow or whatever. Given my situation, I had 2 young kids at home. I was working a full-time job that I had like the longest commute of life happening at that time. I was like, there's no way I have time for that. And it's one of those things we were talking about earlier, how you said in your intro was just the stress and the thoughts of like, it would all just eat me up in addition to all that stress of trying to get to all these appointments that I was like, it probably won't, in my head, I was like, it's the likelihood of it actually working, it didn't seem as probable to me. And so when she was like, at the end of the day, do you want a baby to come home? Like, what are you, and let's go with which option will bring us bigger chances or the possibility? Where is it a little bigger versus going the other route? And so And then, at the end of the day, I was like, surrogacy, like, why did I have so much trouble doing that when I adopted my first two? I was never part of like the pregnancy part of their journey. So at that point, I was like, okay, well, it seemed like an easier decision for me, which it may be harder for other women who maybe have never adopted or just they don't have that part in their journey. So it's harder to kind of come to terms with it. So for me, even though I had a hard time, I came full circle pretty quick and I was like, oh yeah, let's just get this going. We're going to do this. And I think what people get mistaken with is that they say like, oh, if you just do surrogacy or just adopt, like it's easy or you're like smooth sailing from there. Yeah. That's not the case. It's never easy. I've heard worse stories and all these these just horrible stories. But like for us, we had to switch surrogates. So halfway through, and that was hard because you just restart the whole process. You have to interview people and then just all the meds that you have to pay for them to go to, everything was just a hot mess. And so that was pretty heartbreaking and unexpected. So I think I like to share that because some people don't realize that like things can actually just fall through the cracks, even if it's not you, know, and you feel even more disconnected from all of it. And it feels frustrating that you can't control a lot of these things. And so we found our surrogate, and sure enough, she was like the easiest person to work with. She was wonderful and it was smooth sailing. And then the way we found out about our twins was we were traveling for a wedding. It was literally right before COVID. Because I remember getting now, it's all coming back to me now, right? Like we were sitting there and you hear all the news of like, quarantining this and that. And you're like, what is that? You we're just like brushing it off. We're like, oh, the US. They're just, because we're in the Philippines. We're like, we're just, gosh, we'll just figure it out when we get home from the Philippines, And so we were there for a wedding and then time zone wise, right? So we had to do our first ultrasound. So it's like 4 a.m. our time and we're on FaceTime with our surrogate. And the audio was off, like, just, of course it was. We were in the hotel and I go, Albert, my husband's name's Albert. I was like, Albert, I think they just backspace and said, like they would put baby A and then they backspace and they put baby B and they like circled something else. And he goes, I was like, I think there's two in there. And he's like, no, that's not possible. He's like, that's not possible. No, they just made a mistake. And I was like, all right. I was like, if that's your story, that's not what I think happened. And sure enough, I just stayed up all night waiting for like the time, for US to wake up and to hear from my fertility doctor. But as I was doing that, I Googled it and it was like, sure enough, a lot of frozen embryos, there's a higher chance that they will split. So we have our 4 kids total. And that's definitely not what we negotiated. But I share that a lot where I'm just like, I'm not a huge like manifester person, but I do believe that like if you believe it enough, right, sometimes it will come true. The how sometimes just isn't exactly how you planned it, right? So I always wanted 5. So I always joked to my husband, I was like, well, I'm closer to what my number was. In my head, I think we're all thinking the 5 though is probably going to be a dog. We just recently had to put down our fur baby of like 15 years. So he was always our 5th, so it's like, maybe that's what the 5th is, because I don't know if I can handle another baby. Yeah. So that's my story, and that's what led me to, but the burnout part, like I think that comes into also with not only infertility and the family building part, but work wise, right? Like I think naturally as a woman, I'm constantly just being like, I want to make it big. I was working at a tech firm and I wanted to like keep going and hustling, and then realizing I was burning out all the time, and I was like, this is not for me anymore. I've always wanted something different. And I feel like just with my track record with like how unique my family was built, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be ballsy and I'm going to start my own business and I'm going to try something different where I can truly make an impact and help women that are going through something so hard and so invisible, right? Like it's such an invisible struggle that like, and just like you said, like it's so hard for women to talk about it. You may see it online, but those people are far removed from your circle, and having that support system is like a huge thing. And so I'm really enjoying the coaching that I'm doing now. It's just so moving, like I just feel so honored to be a part of someone else's journey to help them get through it. And it's not as hard as it was for myself, who had to like mentally go through all this stuff all on my own. I had my husband, but that's different, right? I think it's different when it's your husband versus when you have your friends who just pop out babies. You're just like, I can't talk to you about this. My husband was just more like, well, I'm sorry. My guys don't work as, my husband women in general is just very practical. Where I want to just talk about this stuff over and over and over again until like my face is blue. And so I get how women are like, we like to do that. We like to talk through things and figure it out and see what feels good to us. So it's so nice to be able to be kind of just pay it back and just, be there for women when they're going through something that they never thought they would have to. And it's a really hard thing. I think just that hurdle alone is the hardest one, right? Like, I just wish it wasn't this way, and it's full of heartbreak and loss and grief that no one will understand unless you've been through it. And so that's why, so that's what I do on my podcast as well, just sharing stories and insights on my own story, which I just literally just gave here. So sorry it's so long, whoever is listening. But
no, that's
hopefully
fine.
it helped. Hopefully you're able to pick something up.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. No, thank you for sharing. It's you said about how far I got in my journey. So mine was sort of similar to you in that I think you said that you never got pregnant. Obviously, I know that there are some women out there that obviously have had multiple miscarriages and things like that have caused them to be not be able to have children. But I was the same as you. I just never caught it. Just never happened for me. And when I was about, I think I was about 19, 18, 19, I was diagnosed with multiple autoimmune diseases. So I had to have my thyroid totally removed. I was diagnosed with low iron anemia. I had to have like a 2-point blood transfusion. I was diagnosed with sort of various different things. There's something called Graves' disease, which is the autoimmune condition that attacks your thyroid, but then it goes on to attack other parts of your body. Potentially we're looking at lupus at one point. So it was just kind of like a hot mess of kind of diseases going on in my body. And then I was diagnosed with polycystic ovaries, not polycystic ovary syndrome, but just polycystic ovaries. I'd gone because I was having a lot of pain in my sort of pelvic region, and I had some tests done. I had an internal scan, and they said, you could actually see the cysts on the ovaries quite visibly. So you've got quite big ones there. And then one day I was walking, I was out shopping, and I suddenly went into absolutely agonizing pain. Felt this kind of weird sensation going on. I rushed into a public toilet, and I was bleeding quite heavily, and it turned out that one of the cysts had actually burst and could have like ruptured my fallopian tube basically, and the ovary. And so I ended up getting rushed into hospital to kind of have that dealt with. But yeah, that was excruciating, having a cyst burst. That was not a pleasant experience. But I was still quite young at the time, so I was still kind of, I always knew that I wanted children, I always wanted a family, but I was still sort of in my early 20s. I wasn't really kind of ready at that particular time, so it didn't really sort of factor that much. But then when I got to sort of mid 20s, I would say, I started to think about it a little bit more, and by that time I'd sort of had boyfriends and things like that, and I'd started to think in the back of my mind, it's never happened, why hasn't it happened, and it sort of started to kind of come into the forefront a little bit more. So I went down to the doctors, I had some tests done, and I don't know the medical terminology for it, but it's a dye test basically, where they put sort of like an infrared blue dye and see whether everything's going where it should be, and is it flowing okay, is it getting stuck anywhere. That was all okay. Everything was going where it should be, and they essentially said to me, look, you can keep trying. There's no sort of medical reason other than the cysts, but they don't appear to be kind of actively blocking. But they said that because of my autoimmune diseases, they said, we think what's happening is that my body is essentially killing off the sperm. It's thinking that it's kind of invader in my body, and it's just going on full attack mode and just, annihilating it when it comes in. So I was like, great, thanks for that. That's awesome.
And I think that was what the whole intralipid was supposed to help with, is to make it stop doing that, right? So
yeah, they said I call in myself. I actually said this on another podcast episode. So I do watch Friends, the TV show.
Well,
there's Monica and Chandler. They go through fertility issues, don't they? And it's quite a big sort of storyline. But she says on one of them, so that's what I used to call it when people said I call it a moniker. I've got a moniker basically because the doctor said that I got an inhospitable environment. Basically, I was like, my body will just attack anything that comes into it. So yeah, that was how I referenced it. And so when I got older, I sort of started looking at IVF and fostering and adopting. Fostering was never really an option. Looked at it, but I didn't really, because I wanted to be a mum and a parent. I didn't really like the idea of having to potentially give the child back. You know, when I thought that wasn't going to sit. Yeah, you know, I thought if I bond with that child and become really close to them, I'm not going to want to give it back, and that's going to cause a whole mess of feelings. So fostering was kind of put out of the way. So then obviously we were left with IVF, surrogacy or adoption. In the UK, we're entitled to, depending on what your situation is, you're entitled to one sort of free go on the National Health Service with IVF. Yeah, which we're very lucky for, but there are hoops that you have to jump through to kind of get that. So you have to be within a certain weight category. You know, if you're overweight, they won't do it. If you're in certain relationships, they don't always do it. There's quite a lot of barriers that it's not just, oh, you're infertile, you get the free go. So I started looking at that, never went actually down the route of doing that, but then I started looking at adoption, went down the route of adopting, but I was at the time not in a relationship. My relationship had kind of broken down. And I thought, well, I can still adopt. I'm working. I can still adopt as a single parent. But I moved back in with my mum at the time, and my mum had some depression and some mental health issues after her mum had passed away, and the adoption agency said that until I was living on my own, I was unlikely to be able to be a candidate for adoption while I was living with my mum, because she got this mental health record. It wasn't like she was a threat or a danger, but literally because she got a history of mental health problems, that was like a no-go on the adoption form. I was like, okay, thanks, cheers, that's brilliant. So yeah, I just kept having all these barriers put up basically against everything, and eventually I sort of reached that point where I just thought, it's not on the cards, it's not going to happen, and I just kind of settled into it. And I wouldn't say found my peace with it, but I kind of just realized that it just wasn't going to happen, and I just sort of put it to the back of my mind as much as I could do. But a very big believer, as I said in the intro, in that things happen for a reason, and everyone has got a different story, and I appreciate that. But when I was a teenager, my very, very first boyfriend, love of my life, we were together for 2 years. When I was sort of 16 to 18, we split up. We had a big gap, 10-year plus gap of not being together, and then 7-8 years ago we got back in contact, and within 6 months I was pregnant of getting back together with my very, very first boyfriend.
I have chills.
And yeah, so that literally was my first pregnancy and my only pregnancy, and it resulted in a healthy baby boy who is now 4 years old, and my very first boyfriend is now my husband. And so
that's so,
I'm a big believer. Like I say, I'd sort of settled into that fact that it wasn't going to happen. And I think because I had maybe to a certain extent taken that pressure off myself that it was going to happen, I wasn't actively trying. I wasn't sort of going, right, this week we're going to do it, we're going to we're going to have sex 3 times a week, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to eat these foods, we're going to have sex upside down, and it's going to be great. And because I think you go through that period, where, maybe it'll work if I'm on top or you're on top, and you do all of these things,
you do
and
all the things.
and I think I just I'd switched off, and I think it kind of gave my body a chance to maybe reset itself a little bit, and the pressure wasn't there. And like I say, it happened, and I said to my husband, I was meant to have children with you, I wasn't supposed to have children with anyone else. So to me is, it was my body's way of saying, that's how it happens. So
Yeah.
big believer in manifesting stuff.
Yeah. I feel like I say that I'm not, but I feel like I secretly am. Like, I just don't know how to, like, I feel like there's always the word when you say manifest, it just feels big. And I try to really work with my clients that like work through this part where you can accept some parts, right? You can accept little pieces of it where it gives you a little bit of sense of peace, where you can relax a little, because the next big thing is coming. It's like right there, like it's right behind that. And we just have to get through that uncomfortable stage of like, accepting maybe what we truly wanted in that moment, but maybe that what we truly want is just on the other side, right? And it's gonna happen. Everything does happen for a reason. I know some people that are going through infertility, like they always like, oh, come on, like it's, if they're in the trenches, they're just like, oh, what do you mean? Nothing, none of this is great. But I think once you're on the other side, you start to see, you pick up those pieces. You're just like, oh, it all makes sense now. Like it all made sense to where I am right this moment. And even staring at the kids we do have, you're like, it wouldn't have been the same if it was anybody else, right? Like it's because this baby's here, this kid's here. It all makes sense, and it all happened the way it should have happened. And so you have a beautiful story too. Oh my God, that I seriously thought I had a sweater on.
It's my little fairy tale story. So I like.
You should be like so proud to say it. It is an amazing story.
So you've got your 4 children now, and you've obviously got your coaching business. So how do you, as a mum, balance kind of working with the 4 children, I suppose, would be the big question.
Yeah. Well, I think now that I'm, doing the coaching and the podcast, I have a lot more flexibility and freedom with my schedule, which is great. I don't have a commute. I don't have people to answer to, but it's still stressful, right? Like the marketing side of it, the upkeep of like having a podcast. Like, so in order to do all that, I do look at like daycares and summer programs and all of that. That's your village, right? They're the people that you enlist, that you trust, and they are taking care and entertaining your kids while you are at home. So we still, we try to because my husband's working full time as well. So we got to do what we got to do. I think some people don't want to do daycare or do like summer programs. I'm like, well, nothing will get done then, like there's no way. I will lose my mind. Even if I jumped on a podcast with my mind all scattered after having to like entertain 4 children, I would not be able to do it, So I think it's just really prioritizing yourself and giving you the space, right? Like, I think even though sometimes I do feel guilty, I'm like, oh, they're there like literally all day. But I'm like, that gives me a chance to be like, okay, I can focus on coaching throughout the day, and I can block out time for that, plus block out time for just me time, and then block out time for chores, so there's a lot of stuff that I can still fit in. I think flexibility in my schedule now is so much better than it was when I was working in tech. Even though the flexibility was there, it's still, you always felt like you had to be on and like checking in with people, and it was a lot more stressful, and having to drop what I was doing. So my kids did come home. I had to drop what I was doing and answer a bunch of things, and that was not fun. But balancing now, it's like, it definitely still is a balancing act, because kids' lives, I mean, I think summer, I don't know about you, but summer just seems even crazier. Everything's all over the place. Like, and like, I'm like, oh, you want to have a play date? Okay. I don't know what I have scheduled for work, so let me just figure this out and, ship them off. Or I don't know how anyone stays employed in the summer as a parent.
I know.
Like,
we're on, I don't know about you in the US, but we're UK, we're on our big summer holidays at the moment. I think the kids go back, or my son goes back on the 3rd of September. Okay. So he's in like his 2nd week of summer holidays, and it's just, I'm so ready to like, just run away to a different country at this point. I'm like, no, I'm done.
Summer program. Just come here, send them to my, and then we can just do our work here. Yeah, it's
because people that don't have children, they don't realize either how, like you said about, that you feel guilt then as well, because you feel, okay, well, I could have them here with me and not get any work done, because we know that that's not happening when the kids are around. Or like you say, we can send them to a school, an out of school club, or we can send them to family to look after for a day or a few hours. But you still get this like overwhelming feel of guilt of like, I've just palmed my kid off onto someone else to look after them. And it is a horrible feeling, and it's, you know, we shouldn't feel like that, really.
I
You know, we're
know.
trying to do the best that we can with the equipment that we've got, essentially. You know, we can't work with children around 99% of the time. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is, right, is like being a parent is a full-time job too. So having two full-time jobs working at the same time, there's no way that's, you know, sane for any person, one person, right? And it's a lot of it falls on us too, right? Like a lot of the mental load that we talk about. I call it the mother load, but it's like, you know, it's all the mom things, you know, that you're thinking of. Like, it's just so much. And so I think with balancing now, I think it comes really down to just being like, having more intentionality of like, okay, right now in this hour, I'm going to intentionally work on this and give it my all. And I'm going to turn it off for this amount of time to think of all emails, school emails, whatever, register them. We start school, by the way, like on August 8th. It's like,
you've got like less than that. Yeah, you're not as bad as us then.
Yeah, but we did get out earlier, but it was still like, yeah, it's still long, but like it feels like summer still. It's like a weird timing. Like go back on August 8th and it's still, anyway, it's weird here. But yeah, I think it just being more intentional with your time, I think is the key thing. And just accepting that your schedule's always gonna be changing, right? Like I think sure enough, someone's gonna call me that my kid's sick and I'm gonna have to pick him up, and then that just throws my whole day, right? And then you just feel bad too when they're home. You're just like, okay, well, you can watch some TV while I finish this, you know? And, you know, then you get the whole like, well, I shouldn't put screens on. They should be doing something different. I'm like, well, if they do something different, they're going to come ask me to help them about 10 million times. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. They're doing things with intentionality. That's what I try and do. So I don't know whether there's like a name for it, but you've got obviously like the different kind of working techniques that people use. There's something called eat the frog, which is weird. It's basically like eat the frog method. It does work, but for anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say eat the frog, and I haven't just had some sort of breakdown talking about eating frogs. So I'll preface it and explain it before I go off and just talk about eating frogs. Yeah, so eating the frog, they call it. They may have another name for it in different places, but where I am is eat the frog. Basically, what you do is each morning or each day, you would look at your calendar, and you can do it for personal tasks, work tasks, and you would look at it and you would say, right, what are the worst or biggest things that I need to accomplish that day? So what are the things that need, like the bigger projects that I've got, if they're work related, or what are the things that I really don't want to do today? What are you know, it may be that really crap meeting that you've got to go to with your boss that you really are dreading, or you know, it's take the kids to the football thing for 5 hours that you really don't want to do, you know. So what's the biggest thing that you've got to do that day? And that's the top of your list. Then everything else after it falls down. So you would put the worst thing or the biggest thing at the top, and you would do that first. The eat the frog part of it, or the name came from it, from someone that kind of coined the term, is that if you had to eat a frog in the morning, that everything else after it, that would be the worst thing that you would have to do in the day, is eat that frog. So everything else after it is kind of not that bad. It's not that bad. So that was kind of where nothing compares to eating a frog in the morning. So that was where the eat the frog method came from. So you've got the eat the frog method.
Oh my God, I'm learning something new. This is great.
Yeah. So there's that. And then you've got, I think it's the like Pomodoro or Pomodio something method.
Yeah.
Which is, basically it's like a timer method. You can actually get them on your laptop, and I think it's 15 minutes basically. You would literally set a timer for 15 minutes
and
at a time, and you would do 15 minutes of really, really focused work. And then once your timer goes off, you have a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break, have a coffee, go to the toilet, you know, take the dog for a quick walk, whatever it is you need to do. And then you would come back and start your timer again for 15 minutes, and then that's it, and then you'd have another break. So those are kind of two methods that I use, but like you say, I'm I'm more along the line of you, where I will say, right, I need an hour and I'm going to do an hour. And that hour I will come and I'll sit upstairs in my office and put my headphones in. And, you know, if my son is here, his nan will come around and watch him, or I'll sit downstairs with him and he's kind of playing and I'll talk to him and I'll say, look, you know, you can have an hour watching the TV, or you can have an hour playing in the garden because I can see him, and, you know, he's not going to hurt himself in the garden. But yeah, I'll say, you know, do you want to go play in the garden just while mummy has this 1 hour? And I'll sit with my laptop in the living room and look at him while he's sort of playing, but I'm still working. And then once I've done that, then I'll kind of break and go and play with him for a bit, and you know, go back into mum mode rather than work mode. But that's kind of how I manage the summer holidays at the moment. But I have, as you say, you know, we work for ourselves. And I have been very flexible with my business in terms that I'm very open about the fact I actually changed the business name to Family Sync Media, so it shows that I actually only work with parents. I specify that and I say that to people very openly, because I think that we've got a different set of priorities. I wouldn't feel comfortable working for a CEO of a conglomerate business and then my 4-year-old pops on a Zoom call. It looks unprofessional to them, you know. They're not going to appreciate that. But my son is my son, and I'm not going to turn around and boot him off a video call. You know, if he wants to come and say hi, he can come and say hi. You know, he's there, and I don't want to not have him there. So I'm very open with my clients, and I tell them and I say, look, you know, I'll work with you as long as you don't mind him popping on a call. And likewise, if they've got children, I will say to them, they're more than welcome to come on a call as well. I don't want you to feel like you can't have them on a call if it's easier for you. And that's kind of what I've done in my business, is to sort of set that as a tone for my business, because I've been on podcast episodes where my guests have suddenly, their kids have popped on. One lady, Rena, I spoke to her. She's in America. She was one of my very first guests. Her little boy came on while she was doing the podcast, and that's fine. You know, I would never want to make parents feel like they have to apologize for having their children there, because I wouldn't like doing it for me either. I don't like having to apologize for my child.
You don't want your kids to feel like a burden, right? Like that's just not what you want, right? And you don't want to exude that kind of energy either. And if someone's not aligned with that, it kind of, you know, you're like, oh, no, next. It's like it's not the best energy to have, especially with business. And I think, just going back to like how you were saying, I think even with having kids around and trying to doing your own schedule, I think my lines got blurred a little bit too, where it's like I just work on my phone a lot, and then intentionality has to come in like even stronger, where it's like, okay, I need to put the phone down. Like I can't look at it at all, because then I'll be like, oh, idea. And I'm like, I need to write it down, or like I'll be on my phone. And so there's like a lot of ways to, I think it's just literally just putting down the phone, to be honest. And that, you know, you just need, like how you were saying, how I have times too where I sit there on the computer and I'll mix it in and be like with my kid. And sometimes I forget to intentionally be like, okay, I have to stop at a certain time, where my laptop's just there and I'm like back and forth. And then by the end of the night, I'm like, why am I so exhausted? You know, like I was juggling like 3 different things at the same time. Dinner, walking the kids for their safety, and going back and forth on my laptop for no apparent reason.
So it's one of the things I've struggled with, is trying to get that kind of what do you say, like putting boundaries in my own business. I'm very similar to you. You know, there's come times where it's 11:30 at night and I'll suddenly think, my laptop's just there, I will literally just answer that email, or I'll just do this one social media post, or I'll just do this one thing, and then before I know it, I've been sat there until like 1-2 o'clock in the morning working, which is fine. But then I forget that I've got to get up in, you know, 4 or 5 hours, because my 4-year-old's going to wake up and I'm knackered, and you know, so I've really had to sort of say I'm not working past, you know, 7 o'clock latest at night, and I still struggle with it. But my other thing that I realized that I was sort of stopping by doing that as well, was that I was working in my downtime, I suppose, when my son had gone to bed. So in my head, I was kind of making the most of the time where my son was asleep. I'm catching up, I'm doing work, I'm good. My husband was missing out on our time then, because I'd gone from mum mode straight back into work mode, and I'd kind of forgotten and skipped over me and wife mode, you know, and I was losing that a little bit. So I've really had to kind of in my head sort of go, no, unless it's completely urgent, the laptop goes down, the phone goes off, my son goes to bed, and then it's me and my husband's time to, you know, have our time together, our dinner together, you know, watch Netflix and, you
doing
know,
all the things.
yeah,
Sounds like
you
what I
know,
was talking
and
about.
yeah,
Not anything. You just said exactly the stuff that we do it here at home too. It's
yeah,
just
exactly.
but I love that you integrate that in your business where you remove that barrier for clients to have that pressure, but to also share your own and be relatable. I think that's what helps, you know, build that trust with clients too, and just helps it be easier for everybody in a working relationship specifically, right? Like when you're working with someone, it's nice to know that you don't have all these high expectations of them in terms of balancing their family and all of that. And if their family's, you know, coming into Zoom calls and all that, it's that must feel nice, you know, as a client to know that you respect that and are open and flexible with it. And it relieves all that pressure. And, you know, when the pressure's gone, as we talk about, even with fertility, when the pressure's gone, things just work and things, you can be more productive and things happen.
Definitely.
So that's beautiful.
I actually think what you just said there is a really nice way to end. I think, yeah, definitely once you've kind of let that go, it's a more positive place to be, I think. Yeah,
100%.
definitely. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Rachel. It's been lovely to talk to you. I could talk to you about so many other things, but obviously I'm conscious that I've taken up a lot of your time already. And then we had some technical problems on my side. Very professional.
No, I would love to do it again another time. This was a wonderful conversation. You seem like a lovely person, and so
Definitely.
I felt like we got on really well. So I would love to catch up again another time if you ever wanted to. So
more than happy to. Yes, more than happy to come on. And yeah, if you want to do a, you know, a duo on your podcast, I'm more than happy to come on and talk about my journey and whatnot, and do it on your podcast as well.
I would love for you to share it on my podcast as well. So yes, let's organize that. And oh my God,
Lovely.
it was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely. Thank you so much for coming on, Rachel. And I will put all of Rachel's details about her coaching program and her podcast in the show notes for anyone that's listening. Yeah, so definitely if you are having infertility problems and you are struggling, or you've gone through fertility problems, or maybe even if you know someone that's going through fertility problems, as we said, you know, it isn't always something that we talk about. And I think maybe we should talk about it a little bit more. But I think, yeah, if you do know someone that is going through fertility problems, that maybe, you know, someone like Rachel can be a good pointer and a good beacon of how you could maybe approach that conversation with a friend or someone that maybe is struggling a little bit with their fertility. So definitely go and check Rachel's page and details out. They will be in the show notes for anyone that's listening. So thank you again for coming on, Rachel. It's been lovely to talk to you. And we will see you next week for the next episode.